Campbell. Today is May 17th. It is 6:39. We are starting our budget workshop to discuss the reallocation plans presented by the superintendent. So, Mr. McGancy, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what you have before you this evening is a compilation of reductions, adjustments that net out to a balanced budget that essentially maintains level services, which is what we started with the exception of some positions that are eliminated, which we will discuss with you this evening. As you know, with the level services budget, when you have no major projects, special projects, for major equipment purchases within, there's not a lot you can look to in terms of line item control relative to how to reduce a budget without impacting personnel. And that's something we've all talked about throughout the budget process. I think we're all aware of that. With level services budget, that when 90% of it is, salaries and benefits, and the main percentage is purchase services, which has also increased due to the current market. This was a challenge. I want to thank the administrative team who provided the input that they did throughout the process, leading way back to the very beginning. Mr. Pepe for the countless conversations we've had about the different iterations of this. And finally, Mrs. Mallet, who works extremely closely with me throughout this process to bring what we have before you this evening. So I'll walk you through the cover page and then we can discuss the supporting documents, and I do want to answer any questions you have. Certainly, if you have a question this evening that we're not able to answer, similar to has been our practice in past workshops, we can generate a Q&A document with outstanding questions and then send that follow-up information to the board prior to next Thursday's meeting so you have that information in time. I will, at this point, let Jennifer walk you through the balance of the ledger document, and then I'll discuss the next page, the supporting document.
Sure, thank you. Up at the top, you can see the multiple versions of our budget, starting with what this board passed. Then we added in the 235 for the MERS, and then there were adjustments made to the self-insurance contributions by the Board of Finance and the self-insurance, and then finally the reduction to the Board of Ed budget of $630,231. So the net of all of those is $1,550,231, and then below the black line is where we're telling you which account numbers in our budget we will be applying the reductions against. So the first three line items are the health insurance allocation between the regular ed, special ed, and the ASTE lines, and that nets to the $920,000 reductions as recommended by the Board of Finance and the Town Council. Then we move on to the salary line items. We have a reduction of $505,039 to the teacher salary line item. That will eliminate 6 middle school teaching positions. The next line item down is a positive add back to the budget to reduce our turnover savings line item. If we're removing 6 positions, we won't be seeing the turnover savings on those 6 positions. So we needed to add back an adjustment against what we had done in the fall for the turnover adjustment. Instead of expecting to have 10 positions, I'm essentially reducing it by 3 positions. So we
10 retirements.
Yes. Usually what we do is we calculate if somebody's leaving, we take the master's step less the bachelor's step to realize what we project to be the savings. We do have
Against the salary of the teacher that's retiring, so it's the attrition dollars, right? So when you have retirement, you're assuming the top step, and then we use the master step 3 as what the new person would come on, and the differential is the savings that we realize.
And that's taken into account in the fall when we're doing the budgeting for the original budget that gets brought to you. So by reducing or eliminating 6 positions from the teaching line item, I don't believe that we can count on having turnover savings of 10 individual retirements as we would normally have had.
So you think it's gonna be less than 10?
I think we can't count on saving 10.
So it's probably less about the FTEs than the attrition, because what we looked at were the vacancies that we have in the recent current hires. And so we have science, we have math, we have technology education, again, consumer science. Those are not folks we've been able to replace at master's step 3. It's a lot more competitive than that in this market right now. So we wanted to be conservative with the amount of attrition dollars that we were initially banking on. Remember, when we do the budget back in, when we first start, we don't know where the retirement's coming from. We just do a 10.
Right.
But when you start to realize that it's going to come in shortage areas, we can't leave ourselves short in the attrition area. So that was the adjustment that was made relative to that. I think Jen's point is, from a FTE standpoint, it's the equivalent of 3 FTEs, although it's not going to be adding 3 FTEs, it's just the attrition dollars that we're talking about when we replace those retired positions.
And then the next line item down is we've had a recent notification of a retirement in the maintenance staff as well. So at this time, we're proposing to eliminate 1 maintenance position based on that retirement. And then from there, there's information that came to us after you passed the budget. In particular, the new insurance policy with KERMA for our workman's comp and our property and liability insurance. So we were able to realize savings in those line items based on the new policy that's been locked in and agreed to by both the town and the Board of Ed. So you'll see some workers' comp insurance, there's a reduction of $99,000. And then lower down, the last item is the portion of the workers' comp insurance that gets allocated towards the special ed line item. So the 2 of those together are 1 policy. And then if we go back up under purchase services, the finance committee and the Board of Ed will remember we brought a proposal for the renewal of the athletic training contract, and the result of that is an increase to the line item of $17,000. We've also been notified of some savings by the network manager of our CEN, which is our Connecticut Education Network policy for next year. And again, property and liability insurance. Although we saved on the workers' comp side of the policy, our property liability insurance went up, and that's mainly due to the cyber insurance policy. So that is why there's an increase of $12,000 on that line item. Moving into the supply line items, the high school has reached out about the increased enrollment that will be caused by the block scheduling. So we want to make sure, as you remember when we brought the budget to you in January, we held all those supply line items level with where they were this year. So we just felt that we needed to put some extra supply line money in these areas for art supplies, tech ed, family consumer science, math, science, and business education supplies.
If you think back to the block scheduling presentation that the high school did a couple meetings back and the amount of increased requests we have for electives, we now need to account for the supplies and materials that we need in those classes. So that's the adjustment to the positive that you see for those line items.
And then in the middle of the supplies, you'll see there's a reduction to the oil heat, and that again is based on information that came to us after your January approval, where we locked in, I believe it was 44,000 gallons of heating oil. And then we moved down to the special budgets line items. Essentially what we're doing here is any of the incremental increases in the agriculture, science, and technology budget, we're moving those incremental increases into grant usage. Our ASTE grant is in a good position. We recently, I think 2 years ago, increased our enrollment in that program, so we are receiving about $650,000 annually. There are 2 other teachers and a guidance counselor that we fund with that grant, but we believe that we can add these other items into that grant at this time.
So one of the comforts with using this grant is that they've never expended it, and so it actually continues to accrue. And this is an entitlement grant. This isn't something we have to apply for, and it's not something that ends like the RBESSER grant. This is something that's recurring annually as long as we're running the ag side program.
And then that wraps it up. The last item again is the workers' comp insurance. So the net of all of these items is the $1,550,231 of a reduction to the operating budget.
When you get to the second page, the area that I think would probably cause the most conversation this evening was the reduction of teaching positions and the impact on class sizes as a result. That is something that we shared, early on prior to the town council adoption of the budget, that there's potential if we get a reduction, we may have to look at eliminating positions which could result in increased class sizes in some grade levels. So as we did a review of both the enrollment study from May, which was pretty accurate, given the 2018 enrollment study, but also the data that we pulled from the PowerSchool, which is our student information system, this year's current enrollment at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. We ended up starting to hone in on the middle school enrollment levels. The enrollment study shows that the middle school enrollment levels over the next 3 years is going to continue to decrease. So there's, that would be the one area that if there was a class size adjustment to be made relative to staffing levels, is where it would occur. It's typically, if we think back to past budget cycles, it's most of the attrition with staff and some layoffs has been at the elementary level in terms of less sections offered, or certainly at the high school in terms of positions that we just didn't fill in order to avoid layoffs. Given that the high school has increased from 22 to 25 credits, with 2,000 students needing, 3 more credits each, there's no room to eliminate positions at the high school. And I think if you also think to the presentation again, the amount of electives kids are now taking that they weren't previously prior to the block schedule implementation. Mr. Pepe oversees the elementary enrollment relative to the allocation of sections. And so he looked at the board's guidelines of 18, 20, 22, for K-1-2, and then 24 and 3-5. We're pretty much at a place that with no reductions to elementary, our class sizes would stay within those guidelines and pretty much mirror what they were again this year. It was these, and really looking at the elementary, it was really the 6th grade that caught our eye versus the 7th or 8th. I think 7th and 8th is a little bit of a different piece because they don't have their own team. They're a smaller team. They have what's called a split team. So they have a 7th grade, 2 teams, and 8th grade, 2 teams, but they also have a team that services 7th and 8th, which can offset enrollment bubbles in that. And they also have world language, which adds to the amount of sections students have, which decreases class sizes across the sections. They don't take world language in 6th grade, and they had a whole separate team dedicated to the 3 of the 4 subject areas. So when we looked at the enrollment, and you can see on the document that I provided to you, I think the first piece is if we look at the enrollment study, you can see the trend from starting next year, 23-24, to 24-25 and 25-26. The enrollment dips considerably in both schools. And then you can see as the enrollment study projects and states, it continues to climb back up. And at a point to 31-32, we're going to be, full house again. So there's just kind of this little bit of a dip at this point in time. When we looked at the actual class sizes for the 22-23 school year, you can see based on what that data compared to what we even have in the elementary level, this is far lower. Our average class sizes this year in 4th grade were 22, 3rd grade it was 24, and 2nd grade it was 22. At Kennedy and DePaulo it was between 16 and 18 in 6th grade. So we have far larger classes in the elementary than we do in the 6th grades specifically. I then rolled forward the data for next year. Now the chart that you see in the left-hand column, the challenge we have with projecting out class size by section is they haven't done their schedule build yet. So it's hard to say exactly what the class size will be based on that amount of sections, but we can use what we know is going to be there are 5 teachers on a team. So there are 2 teams, that means there'll be 10 teachers, so essentially 10 sections. So if you look at what the total enrollment is and you divide it by 10, your class size is 21.2. And that's the Kennedy example. At DePaulo is 22.6. When you look at that, both of those numbers, they're both still lower than 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade across the district. So that was the area that we recommended. I did talk to Mr. Romano about the maintenance position and the impact on that. It's going to create some challenges for us. There's some work specific to the individual who's become, pretty crafty at his area of assignment, but it's also, because it's a laborer position, we typically have 2 laborers at a time that travel together, because a lot of the work they do with lifting and moving things is trying to do it with one person. It's gonna cut our labor force down from 4 to 3. And so there's essentially gonna figure out how to always have a second person, which could be one of the techs, to be with a person if there's anything that involves that type of work. And also this particular person right now, and this would, whether the retirement is occurring or not, this would be our problem to have, but it is gonna be a manpower issue, is the person who currently maintains all the fields during the spring and fall sports in terms of the lining and field preparation and all that. And so that's gonna have to be reassigned to another maintenance staff member, and yet there's gonna be down a member, which means more tickets and less amount of time for the others. So it's kind of a pinch felt across the board. So this is, looking at personnel, paraeducators, last year we reduced by 11. When we met with principals this year and talked about what are their current staffing levels relative to paraeducators versus the caseloads that they have, I think there's areas to make adjustments, but I don't know if they're not enough to adjust to the point that we can eliminate positions. And so that's an exercise that I'm going to plan on continuing to do with him throughout the summer. But even there, we talked about even if it was a reduction in paraeducator position, it might not be because there aren't special ed services needed. We're talking more about the service delivery model in terms of special ed teachers, instead. So there's no real attrition to be found there or savings. The Administrators Association, we've talked about that in the past. I've presented extensively on the ratio of administrators to students in our district at our size. We also talked about the contract language, that the savings isn't there because the impact of losing an already thin administrative force against the contract language that says they go into teaching at the top step and the bottom step teacher gets unemployment, you just don't realize the savings there for the impact of that loss of that administrative position. And we also reflect back to a couple years when the maintenance of, it was the custodial supervisor, maintenance bills ground supervisor position was eliminated, as well as the director of technology position was eliminated, and I had taken that on. So, we've in the past, it's been paraeducators, it's been a couple administrators, there's been elementary reductions. We can't afford to do high school right now given the current situation, so this was really the only area that we could land on at this point in time, and feel that it would have the least impact on kids. It is still going to impact kids. Anytime you have larger class sizes, there's going to be an impact. And I think also we have to remember that 5th to 6th grade is an enormous transition for kids, developmentally, the structures of the school. But we are at a point with some of these class sizes that you can see, it's just not something we can sustain at this point in time given the current scenario.
Any questions?
I do. I don't know if this is a fair question to ask, but have we talked to the teachers about how they feel about the increased class sizes? Is that something that they're willing to stay in this district to do, or are they going to leave us? Because it's fair. Teachers, there's a shortage everywhere, not just here. And if, how do they know that they're like, absolutely not, I'm leaving? Are we going to be able to retain staff with these numbers?
So there are no layoffs associated with these
Well, I know that. Yeah.
I don't think you could talk to a teacher in America that would
Okay.
say they would want larger class sizes.
Okay.
So it's kind of like asking the question,
Yeah.
I see your point.
Yeah.
I do think though, given the supports that they have in
Oh, yeah.
Southington, given that we have a history of not laying teachers off,
Okay.
given the building level support they receive, given the climate in our schools,
Okay.
we tend to actually draw a lot of candidates, which is, the Record Journal did the story about the amount of vacancies in surrounding towns. We actually tend to draw a lot of teacher candidates versus lose them at this point in time. And I would also say that if, given the sizes of these class sizes, even these teachers would be admitting that, yes, we don't want more students, because
Okay.
it's always more.
Yeah.
But if you show them the landscape of all the other class sizes across the district and how other grade levels could be impacted against their grade level, given the current numbers, I think any teacher would say, yeah, I don't like it, but I understand it.
So they won't leave us because of it then?
No.
Thank you.
So if I understand you correctly, the 2 middle school teams, the class sizes will not be significantly larger.
Well, I share with you what they will be, so, yeah. So you can see, where it's, at one school they're more 15, 16.
Right. It's still manageable.
That's what it is right now.
Right.
It is gonna go up to at that school 21,
Right.
but to our point, third, fourth, and fifth are all hitting.
But my concern is the elementary.
Mhm.
Those numbers are large, and we've always prided ourselves
Mhm.
for years in trying to do our very best to keep the elementary classes, so it's third, fourth, and second, third, and
Second,
fourth,
third,
right?
fourth. So I shared that data so that we could see, 'cause I really wanted to make this, highlight this evening, that this is very much a temporary fix. Because if you look at the numbers coming up, that's why I highlighted that.
I know.
The cohorts are gonna start to rebound, especially I look at that third grade cohort of
Right, I do
493
too.
students with only 2 teams on middle school. Now, they're in third grade now, so it gives us 2 years essentially, but the reality is I could be presenting a budget to this board 2 years from now, asking for 6 teachers. 3 at each middle school to reinstate the
Oh,
small
yeah,
team.
because those numbers are going to go up.
Yes.
And that's something we have prided ourselves as a board on. And I look at the elementary, and that's bothersome to me. Those numbers are bothersome for me.
We've always tried to stay within the guidelines.
I know.
So,
But as you say, this is a situation where we have a dip
Yeah.
for this, for 2 years, and then we're going back up.
Yeah.
So these 6 positions that we are effectively eliminating will be back on the horizon.
and the other piece to think about though is, so we'll probably have to make adjustments to the fourth grade, the amount of fourth grade sections we have next year, right? Because that third grade is gonna go into fourth, right?
Yeah.
The following year, we'll make adjustments to the amount of sections that we do in fifth grade, but that doesn't always mean adding staff, it just means if there were 18 in third, and 60 in the fourth, now next year there's gonna be 18 in the fourth,
Right.
maybe 60 in the third. And then, so those FTEs could travel with that cohort, so it may not mean I'm coming back looking for 6, I might need 3, I mean, it depends what the cohort looks like at that time.
So those middle school, those teachers, I'm sorry, does anybody else have questions? We
Yeah,
can just.
I've got something to say.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, first, thank you for kind of laying out this profile of year over year. I think it gives us the advantage of being able to kind of look ahead, so we can start having conversations, hey, next year's budget, what are we looking at, right? Keep having those conversations. Looking at how we look like we've got an enrollment dip over the next 3 years in the middle school, and then it looks like it comes up. Can you go into, right now with the House bill, was it 5,003, I believe it is? I know we don't know what that's gonna be, but I believe that would take effect in the 2025
Correct.
school year. Can you just kind of go over some of that?
Sure, so as it stands right now, the numbers, vary depending on which budget you're looking at for House Bill 5003. The Appropriations Committee has a number, the Republican caucus has a number, the Democratic Party has a number, and the governor has a number. They're all 4 numbers are very different. The lowest I've seen is a net gain to Southington of $2 million. So I would go off the lowest number because
Sure.
obviously, the idea that we probably need to convey to folks is that the educational cost sharing revenue comes to the board by law, so that's $2 million more comes to the board. But then some communities could then say, well, then the local contribution is going to be $2 million less because the state gave you $2 million more. So it doesn't necessarily mean the board gains $2 million more. It depends on, we always break out our contribution by the federal contribution, which is almost nothing ever, and then the majority of it is the local contribution and then the state contribution. So I remember saying to our town manager at one point, I wish we could do our budget later. Right? And you all remember, because you see it right now, all the locked in prices based on what we were using as projections prior to locking these in, because we didn't know. That, because if we knew what the governor's budget was gonna be, if we knew what the grand list was, and that kind of thing, then we could more accurately forecast a budget for the Board of Finance and Town Council's consideration. And he said, well, you're not to worry about that money, that's revenue for the town, it's not revenue for the board. And that's a fair statement, just because we get $2 million more doesn't mean we owe $2 million more, because then he has to balance the needs of the rest of the municipality against what the board is receiving when he does his budget.
Nothing?
Well, and that's where we as a board do our jobs to support you in doing your job. So we appreciate the conversation and the efforts in putting together, projections, because it allows us to then have conversations, outside of these meetings and with our constituents at the town, to further education in this district. So thank you for bringing that up. I think it's a valid point in what we're projecting out over the next 2 years, and the support that we should be getting from the state level.
I appreciate the chance to have this conversation with you before next week's vote, so that we're able to kind of just answer these types of questions in a relaxed forum. What I would ask the board to at least consider tonight is whether it's just through consensus or whether it's just through what people each individually feel, we do have to start working with the bargaining unit because there's going to be an impact to the elimination of these positions on teaching assignments, and it creates a lot of anxiety for teachers. They want to know where they're going to end up. So I know the vote isn't officially until next week, and people may have other ideas that we can talk about tonight. But if not, then I would want people to say, this at least makes the most sense at this point in time, Steve. Nothing's official until next Thursday. We did tell the teachers today that these were the positions that were recommended tonight, because I do not want teachers reading in tomorrow morning's newspaper that there are recommendations being made that could impact their teaching assignments and their jobs. I just didn't feel that was fair to them. But the balance is we also want to make sure the board had the first opportunity to discuss this publicly. So it is a very fine line.
I appreciate that.
So the MERS, right? So there's an article about MERS recalculation that there may be the potential for some money coming back to us. Where are we with that?
So I remember exactly what I've been talking about. It got me a little excited until I realized that we wouldn't know if we were going to get any relief, for lack of a better term, until June 30th, I guess, is when. What happens is a recommendation is going to come out of the legislative session, but then they have to take that recommendation and go to the municipal employee group that sets the rates, if you will, kind of like our self-insurance, I guess. And then the municipalities will be notified of, how that plays out. So our portion of MERS, it's about $845,000 total. Our portion is roughly $200,000 of what the increase needed to be in terms of the adjustment. So, all 235, it says right there. So that if something were to change and things were level set, that would be the 235, but I think it would be after the rules as adopted budget and assignments have been made. I think technically probably could go one of two ways, right? If that money's in our budget and it's our money, is that something we can use to address needs? Or what does the town feel happens there? They did put it in a separate line item. If you remember a few years back with the teacher's retirement debate, they took a chunk of money, but they put it in a separate account that wasn't the town's or the Board of Ed's, and then when that legislation died, they just put it back into the general fund. This right now is part of our operating budget, the money that was designated for MERS.
So this is somewhat of an obvious question, and you guys did do a lot of work in putting this information together, and it's not coming as a surprise. But it's $505,000 is the teacher salary benefit reduction. And by reducing 6 teachers, it was a level service budget, now it's even less of a level service budget, right? Because we're going down, we're reducing. Has there been, we got the budget book, we've all gone through that ad nauseam, but where have you looked other than teaching positions, elimination of teaching positions? Because we keep talking about we don't want to impact the classroom, don't impact the classroom. Are there extracurricular activities? Are there other things that can be hit in this down period that would allow us to save these teachers?
So
Because it's not a layoff, as you say, and I think that's an important point to make. These people will bump through the union into potential open positions should there be any. But as we talked about, it depends on their certifications, and so this could be somewhat of a big mess. Not as easy as it sounds. You got 6, they bump into 6, and then so we're done. It's probably not going to end up like that. So where other than this have you looked?
So across every bargaining unit, part of it.
Outside the bargaining,
Okay.
outside the rest of this book.
Oh, outside of the book, we tossed around ideas around pay for parking, pay for play, and like revenue streams, if you will, that could be generated. When we thought about kind of the current situation for families in the economy right now, it was like we're already giving free lunches to all families, and if we start to charge for pay for play, we saw how that played out in middle school. It was just something we ended up reinstituting and refunding several years later because the boosters couldn't sustain the fundraising. And we find that we had actually less volunteerism and fundraising and booster involvement post-pandemic. Actually, almost every organization does, beyond school systems, that wouldn't be sustainable. So the hardship would be placed directly on the families and the athletes. That would be the one area. I wouldn't have, if it were at a point that I couldn't find favorable class sizes with these eliminations, we would have had to go that route. But I thought that class sizes of 14 or 15 and not, eliminating them and looking at other areas, may not have been best for the community at large.
And so, if I may, and to second that question, did we relook at purchase services specifically?
Yeah, that's how we ended up getting into some of the adjustments you see around locked-in costs and fuel costs, and some things that fell in our favor, around, the locked-in fuel pricing came to our advantage. But in terms of, we're actually still right now negotiating with vendors to try and see is there a better price we can get for a 3-year or a 5-year agreement versus a 1-year agreement. The danger with that is obviously locking in anything without knowing what the future revenue sources are going to be.
Okay. Because I know earlier this year we took the step to basically freeze all supply purchasing and things of that nature, being very proactive, right? So, just specific to purchase services as we project into another school year, are there any opportunities to either cut a line item, eliminate a line item, or seek savings like we've seen, here?
To Mr. O'Shannon's point, I think in any other budget year that I've been part of, there's always been major projects, special projects, equipment, purchaser. There's been areas where we've talked about painting is going to go from 100,000 to 50,000. We talked about vehicle lease versus purchases. I think at times we've been fortunate enough to lean into the 2% fund. All of those options were off the table. Even the line items for supplies and materials, before we even proposed our budget to you, Mrs. Mellon and I looked at what had been typically fully expended and what had been under expended, and where could we hold them at zero, even though we knew there was inflation and increased prices for supplies and materials across the board.
Yes, I know you explained it, but if you could do it again for me. On the maintenance position that we're eliminating, what will that entail? What will we lose there? Say again.
So the title of the
This would be, where would this be? All, just general?
all of our maintenance is district-wide, yeah, so it wouldn't be in one specific building. But the position is considered, the classification is laborer. They have techs, they have laborers,
Right.
classifications. So this particular position is a laborer position. And so, yeah, the impact is, trying to get people to do more with less time.
So it will have an impact on our.
One other question, so we've talked a lot over the last couple of years about the unallocated funds, right, the CARE. Where are we for this year? We've talked about it at finance, but I think it's important, where are we this year?
It's gonna be a very tough year to close out. As I've been saying, it's part of our finance committee updates. Our last pay of the year is on June 30th, which complicates, all the taxes, the Medicare, the final MERS calculation, the final healthcare contributions made by the employees. So there's a lot of moving parts. We still have special education students that are moving between schools. And because some of them are after the March 1st filing with the excess cost system at the state, any differential there now, we would have to pay out. And if there is reimbursement at the state level for the special ed excess cost, 4.5 times the per pupil allotment, that money will go towards the town's portion of the educational cost share grant. So, there's a little bit of, last minute movement in schooling. So it's gonna be very tight. I'm looking at it after every single payroll. Mr. Romano's office is updating the transportation costs. We're still looking at the McKinney-Vento. Mrs. Cavallero is looking at the outplaced students and where we're at against the system, so it's all hands on deck, and we're still in a spending freeze for the schools. I'm sure that some of the principals can tell you how frustrating it's been. I got a call about, some custodial supplies, and I said, yes, of course, we're not gonna go without toilet paper and those kind of things, but people are holding back, and it's gonna be a tight end of the year, so I would not anticipate a large or even any new year 2%.
I think it's a good opportunity for me to offer, just a reminder. I know, the public will watch this at some point, but it was mentioned at the town council meeting how well the board has managed their funds the past couple of years, which I take as a compliment, but some of it had to do with COVID. And
Most
so,
of it.
Most of it did.
and there was a comment that it was $760,000 from last year's budget that we were able to use, and it wasn't from last year's budget. There was only $450,000 last year, but 225 of that was going right away from the 27th paycheck. So really, when you net it out, there was about $225,000 out of a $104 million budget left. With that said, the money that had accrued over time was due to, during COVID, the substitute teacher accounts and the transportation accounts netted a lot of excess revenue for the district, which allowed us to get a lot of major projects done.
I'm just kidding, but it didn't net extra revenue. That money was gonna be spent, had we not been out of school, had COVID not been there, I think, just to clarify even more, it's not extra money.
Correct.
It was excess because we didn't have school.
We didn't have to spend it,
But had we been normal, that money would have all been spent, we
we
wouldn't
would
have
have had
had
no excess.
these years of.
To this year's point is like, Mrs. Mallett and I are talking pretty often to try and get to zero. Like, are we gonna make it? And when I say get to zero, not spend it, it's
Right.
like not try to find other ways to get to zero because we overexpended. And it's just because, there's not gonna be an excess fund, that we can realize. It's just, yes.
My other concern is, and correct me if I'm wrong, we do not know definitively if we would have any extra special ed costs, correct?
We-
That we just don't know.
We never know that.
We never know that. And that could really hurt us. Certainly if we have to outplace those kids, it would be, we just wouldn't have the money to do. What would we do in a situation like that?
Board certification can't have a contingency account.
No.
They have a contingency when those types of unanticipated expenses come up. So with us, it ends up being the shell game. So you'll often see Mrs. Mallett coming to the finance committee requesting transfers between and amongst accounts. And whenever that happens, it means somewhere else has to do it less so that we can,
Well, I think the public needs to be aware of that could be, I certainly hope not, but it certainly could be a possibility, that we could see an expense there that we're not anticipating, right?
absolutely.
Just wanted to mention that.
When was the last time that we had to go to the finance board for,
For appropriation.
yeah,
I think when Sherry Danello was in my position for 23 years, I believe she was here, I believe she said she only went one time. Right. And I don't recall what the circumstances were, but it's a very unusual, we work really hard to stay within our means, and I'm sure, like I said before, the principals can speak to it, that if things are getting tight, the first thing is a spending freeze at the school level. So,
We typically try for the full year to put that 25% of every supply line item because essentially that's what, if a boiler goes, if I'll place to it, like if a big number pops from someone, we have to be able to make adjustments to get there.
but again, like that, so in full disclosure, I knew that. But it's more of an attestation of how we run the school system, how lean we run it, how effective that we utilize staff, and funds and everything else. Again, like, this is, as far as making the best lemonade out of lemons, I feel very comfortable with what's being presented here. Part of the other thing, Mrs. Carmody mentioned the class sizes. Now, I understand that these are pupils per certified teaching staff, correct? Does that take into consideration maybe paras that are in the room or anything like that? Or, because again, like my own kids, as they've been going through elementary school, we have a para or two in a class. And I know that all the paras are designated for a particular student with an IEP. Again, they also help with other students. And I know, again, like it's part of, you can't necessarily look at the individual trees in the forest, it's more of looking at the whole entire environment of the forest and how it's behaving. So is that fair to say that even though that these numbers are high, that we still have supportive staff in a lot of those rooms?
Yeah, it's a hit or miss.
Right.
It's not, there's not like always going to be a para in a room, where if you have 4 classes of 22, you might have 1, maybe 2 that have a para in them because of a student with, identified needs. The other 2 may not, so it's not a surefire science. So, yeah, I mean, depending on the nature of the disability, there's some where we share amongst the other child.
Amanda, this was a new adjusted.
No, that was just the existing
Oh, okay.
budget, and then, so we can do something like that if you're comfortable with how this is looking at this point. We can bring an adjusted budget book to you on Thursday.
Okay.
Can I just have one other question?
No.
Okay, thanks. So, and obviously, you said you looked through the book, you've done all this other stuff. Let's say $505,000, right? Where did you look? I'm struggling, and I get it, these class sizes are not huge. They're not. But, in this day and age of trying to find teachers, I'm very nervous that the teachers are gonna start looking at this, as you said, there's 6 eliminations coming, flow down. I think it's gonna hurt us long term, trying to attract people to the district. And I'm just wondering what other options were there? What other scenarios did you guys play out? Other than eliminating teachers?
Yeah. I mean, if that was that, when you came to the,
And not to interrupt you, I just want a clarification, just because I have a problem with the vernacular. We're not eliminating positions.
You are. You're eliminating 6 positions. We are eliminating, the board is eliminating 6 positions. 3 at Kennedy, 3 at Pell.
The position can still exist without having a personnel assigned to that position, correct?
No. I'm answering for them, they can answer themselves. My position, once you eliminate a position, it's gone. You have to add it. You have to add a position, right? It doesn't sit there vacant, ready to be added back into. They've got to add it back to the, am I right? Am I wrong?
so we have to associate a dollar value with the FTE.
Right.
To get to a 0 balance budget. We have had positions, I think, of the middle school curriculum area leaders. That was 1 year across all the kinds of years. We didn't fill that. That was part of the reduction. We didn't eliminate the positions as like they no longer exist. They just weren't filled. And I think this year was the first year we filled them again.
We filled them again, but contingent on funding.
Funding, correct.
Title funding.
Correct.
So no longer out of the operating budget. There was so the positions were unfilled. They weren't eliminated contractually, but we were never able to fund them again until it went through P&D, and the agreement was that it would be funded as long as the grant funds were available. So no longer through the operational budget.
For me, I think to address Mr. O'Shannon's point is we're not eliminating any personnel. We're eliminating positions. No one's getting laid off. That's when people would start to look. If there's fear that they'll be senior or that they're in an impacted area that's going to get moved. But the positions, our FTE count, if at this time next year the town council gives me that old tell me your FTE count, it would reflect 6 less FTEs in the certified line.
So we have retirements that we know about. We have unfilled positions that we know about. If you
We have
vote
resignations.
and resignations.
So it's a matter of moving.
If the plan is approved, then it is a process of taking a look at those 6 positions, the associated people in those positions, and then contractually, the reduction in force language, and the bumping ripple effect that occurs based on seniority. So even, we're talking about those 6 positions at the middle school, but if we have legs throughout based on those folks and the related certifications and the potential open positions that exist, and whether or not they choose to bump into those or not.
And so if and when we see increased funding from the state level, we can then put personnel into those positions.
It goes back to the original conversation, that depends on what the local contribution is, because they could take the increased money from the state and use that to offset the local
Correct.
contribution, and we could still end
Correct.
up with the same or even less money.
Right. And again, I would challenge myself and challenge the rest of the board for us to do our job within the community to make sure that our district receives those funds. And obviously, I know you can't speak to that, and neither can I as an individual, but
I think the other piece that I can say to teacher candidates is, and I can say with confidence, we've not laid off teachers, during my tenure at least. I think the other thing we can say is when we look at what we did with the teacher's contract for the shortage areas in terms of the incentive that we offer, I think the board did a great thing with flattening the grid. It was something that was long overdue. We were losing teachers in the middle of the grid. And so in that regard, but we also know when the stories were done on teacher shortages, we draw from surrounding towns because of the quality of the school system. So I'd be hard pressed to think in this economy, because all school districts, I think we highlighted all the increases are up against a budget constraints. In terms of where else I looked, because I did not answer that question for you.
Thank you.
It's hard to take 5 gallons of water out of a 3-gallon bucket.
Again, I'm gonna say what I said before, this is not a level services budget. And you,
The minute
they
you
can-
increase class sizes,
they can
it's
say it
no
as
longer
much as they want.
If they
It's not a
were,
level service budget.
I agree with you completely. If the class sizes stayed the same and they didn't increase, that's the service everybody got this year, right?
Exactly.
I was a parent of a 6th grader. I enjoyed a class size of 16 kids. Next year's parent of a 6th grader is going to see a class size of 21. So that's not level anymore because it's changed. I agree.
So we can say publicly, correct me if I'm wrong, to the public, to the press, that we are not looking at any layoffs. Correct? Am I correct in that statement? Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
More of a comment than anything, and again, I guess it's, you know me, I love words, right? And words have meaning, and especially when applied to certain parameters. And with this, I understand the concept of level service budget in the sense of, well, if we go from 16 class size to 21 class size, I understand it. I think the biggest take home for me, and again, having kids in the system and having to wear a lot of different hats, being a community member, being on this board, being a dad, is the fact that these kids are still going to receive the education that we've set for, whether it's in our curriculum committees, whether it's the game plan dictated with the teachers, and what the expectation of achieving excellence and understanding of material. So even though that we've now reduced it again, we're still able to teach kids in an effective manner. And I think that's the biggest take home for me with this is, again, I get it, if we try and explain the level service budget versus not level service budget, but as far as I'm concerned, as long as kids can learn in school what they're supposed to be learning, I, as a dad, am glad to take on the sense of, I'm gonna have to spend a little bit more time making sure my kids understand material, and maybe spend a little bit more time communicating with the teachers to make sure, is there anything else that I can do as a parent? And, you know, I think that's the take home. It's not a board taking on this by itself. It's not the town council taking this by itself. We're doing this as a community. And, you know, I really do think that out of the current basket of lemons, that this is actually not a terrible pitcher of lemonade. So, sorry.
Yeah, can we get a consensus on your feelings, how you're feeling about this? Any changes? Your own thoughts? Sean, you're smiling. Sean smile.
What do you want, a consensus?
Yeah, just how do you, are you thinking positively towards these adjustments for budget, for the reallocation?
You know, I am thinking positively and can I talk? Is it?
I guess you
Who's gonna
can.
stop you? Who's gonna stop
You
you?
already
Is
started.
that yes, everybody?
No,
Yeah, I'm thinking
go
positive.
ahead, Mrs. Garrity.
You sure?
I'm positive here.
I am thinking positively, and that's wonderful. And your question about, are we going to be delivering the same quality education? Joe, teachers always do that, okay? As far as I'm concerned, I was a teacher and they're gonna do that. I just have a problem, because I think there are some unknowns that really could still happen between now and when's our school year, June 30th. There are a lot of unknowns. I'm very happy that there are no layoffs. I have to say I don't want to see any layoffs. I just don't know how we continue to do it with the limited amount of money that we get every year. I find that, you know, the public always says to me, geez, that Board of Ed, they're always saying they don't have any money, and yet they don't have any layoffs. And that perception is difficult to justify, and that's all I'm saying on that. Of course, I'm thrilled that there are no layoffs, and I think we've done a wonderful job of what we have. But I have some concerns. I have concerns. I mean, I'm pleased with this, Mrs. Clark, but I do have some concerns. Personally.
Go ahead.
No, I'll
Okay.
speak. I appreciate, again, same words I said earlier, I appreciate the detail that you put into the presentation tonight. I think it makes sense, you know, understanding, we talked when we started this budget process, you know, just how unusual this year is, the cost increases across all of our services. It's not unique to Southington, it's not unique to Connecticut even. So again, I appreciate it, I think it makes sense. Personally, I feel pretty favorable with what's been presented tonight.
Sean?
I guess in the limited time that we have here in public session today, what I would say is that I appreciate the work by all of us, including our administration that has gone into a very challenging budget cycle. And I think the net result, both from our work, administration, and from Board of Finance, Town Council, I think our net result is something that we can all live with. And in running the operation or running the business of a school district, there's always going to be challenges. And I think, you know, earlier we spoke about special education and, you know, how do you budget and anticipate, you know, having to send a student out of district or, you know, acquiring, you know, a student that needs services that we can't provide. You know, these are all unknown things, but I think to Joe's point earlier, in 20 plus years, we've only ever had to go ask the Board of Finance and Town Council one time, you know, for an allocation of funding, which means that we're doing an excellent job of managing and running an operation in a district with the resources that we're provided, okay? And so we're in a budget cycle right now where level services or not, right? Increasing class sizes or not, we're running and operating a school district with a quality education, and we're servicing everyone. And I think that's the point to take away from this is we're not eliminating programming, okay? We're providing all the services that we can absolutely provide. As a matter of fact, if you look year over year, we're providing more and more services to our students, to our families, to our community. So I think overall the net result is a positive. The one thing that I would say, and again, I've said this before, if there was a way to really drill down into some of our textbooks and, you know, periodicals, and copying expense and printing, transportation is a whole nother ordeal that, you know, I could go on forever about, but some of those costs that we have and incur year over year, I think going into this next school year, I think there may be some opportunity in our printing, in our textbooks, in our periodical purchases to, you know, bring that into the 21st century and eliminate some of those costs. And if we were able to do some of that, I think maybe we could bring back a position or two, teaching position or two back into the classroom. And I think that, I mean, that's my personal take on it, but I think it's something that would be supported by the community and the rest of the board. You know, say we use a textbook for another year, and that means that we don't have to purchase $80,000 worth of textbooks. Does that mean that we could then bring back a position in the middle school? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But again, right, challenge every line item, and see where the opportunities exist. I think that coming out of this budget cycle, right, and this decrease that we saw from the Board of Finance, it allowed you as a superintendent and the administration to do an analysis, use an enrollment study that we already paid for, and do a projection that I think we all see value in, right? Because it identified a dip in enrollment at a certain grade level that we can then manage our operation and our school district to achieve a cost savings without reducing a service or an education to our kids in our community. So I think that's great. And it's something that we should utilize not only currently, but in future academic years, future budget cycles, to find opportunities to not only save money, but achieve efficiencies. Because we're gonna have to do it moving forward. Because if not, the tax burden on our taxpayers, on our community is gonna be ever increasing. So we have a fiscal responsibility to do these type of things. Net overall, I think the process has been a positive, and you know, I appreciate my colleagues on the board, and I appreciate the work that the administration has done. So overall, I would say positive, and I'm happy with where we're at and what we came up with.
My only comment would be, and Joe, I respect your opinion, I really do, but not every child has two parents at home that can support them. And I was lucky enough to grow up in an environment, I think most of us were, but for the children that don't have it at home, they rely on their teachers. Sometimes that's all a kid has. That's it.
Mr. O'Shannon?
I've said this to you before, and it's, you guys are responsible for running this district. You've got to do the best that you can with the funds that are available, with input from this Board of Education, input from your leadership at the different schools, and the administration. And you guys know what it takes to run the district, what is necessary to run the district. All I would like to see is just maybe a different or an additional scenario where we look at where else, and I know there's this thing it squeaks when you pick it up. There's nothing in it, but where else can we look? For that amount of money to say that we don't want to cut teachers. There's always different scenarios. Now, there's impact. Any move is going to impact the students in the district. There are. I guess what's running through my head is impacting students in the classroom versus impacting students elsewhere, not in that educational forum, in those four walls of the rooms, is what I was looking for. And I don't know. We still have a couple of weeks. I'd love for you to take that opportunity just to sharpen the pencil a little bit on some of these other line items. And there aren't a lot of things left in those line items. There just
There's
aren't.
not.
I guess the question is, are there things that can be eliminated other than educators in this district? I'm struggling. Let's put it that way.
Again, we've squeezed it as a board. I've seen the administration squeeze it. At the end of the day, outside of locking the thermostats at 55 degrees during the winter time, I don't know how you can find line items to be able to squeeze further. I think overall, again, the best case scenario of looking at these projections, looking at where we can essentially shift things around to. The way that I look at it is we're playing chess, guys. And that's really what it boils down to, is we're having to move things around the board here. And I hope that it's, to Mr. Carson's point, a temporary thing that, again, we got to get through this, and then come the next year or the following year after that these are the types of things that we're able to reinstill. Again, I'm in very much favor of this. I think it's a great opportunity for what we currently have.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I can add anything new that hasn't already been said, right? I'm very happy we're not laying off teachers or cutting services, like Sean said there. I like the analysis that was done in this plan, and I think I'm in favor of it, yeah.
I get the list. Lucky. First of all, I just want to say thank you to our administrators, both on my left and my right and in front of me, for all the work that I know went into this budget. I'd like to thank my fellow board members who worked to get this budget passed at the number it was. I don't think anybody wants to hear about layoffs. As Mrs. Carmody said, people have said, oh, the Board of Ed always gets by. The Board of Ed always gets by and doesn't lay anybody off, and almost as though they're looking for layoffs so that then they can say, what's your problem? And I think back years ago to when people have said, oh, the Board of Ed always finds a way. Well, those are back 25, 30 years ago, back in the day when they had an account that perhaps was fully funded that they didn't use, or that they were able to transfer from here to there or make a call or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think this year in particular, I don't know anyone who can say we weren't as transparent as possible. That everyone has seen our budget, gone through it, gotten all their questions answered if they ask them, and know that we can account for every dollar that is spent. We've done that this year. That being said, it is not a level service budget, you're eliminating 6 positions. I get that. What I wanna see is a budget where we can not only add these positions back 2 or 3 years from now, but we can add additional programming that we have talked about wanting to do. Your CNA program, the EMT program, whatever other business programs, things that we have talked about, we have not been able to do. So yes, this year, we are getting by, and I thank you for the work and finding where we can, not affecting our students. But at the same time, I just wanna caution and say, we need to be moving forward, not treading water. And that's what we're doing. And I'm glad that we're able to do this without any layoffs, because that is, to me, that we don't have to go there, and I'm really truly grateful for that. I am grateful. I want to see us moving ahead. And that's the kind of collaboration that I'd like to see with us. Can we find next year, can we find savings someplace so that we can move the district forward? So I'll be quiet now, and I will say, yes, I am in favor of this, so, okay. Anyone else have anything to say? Mr. Dancy, do you have anything you want to say? Mrs. Mallett, Mr. Pepe? Okay. I will call for an adjournment, but it's a workshop, so we don't have to. Thank you all for your time.